Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Commander's 2 Cents. On episodes like these, I give you my own personal take on topics about the format in general and current news. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the recent news that came out that the Commander Death Triggers rule is going to be basically changed or fixed or whatnot. The Rules Committee was on a stream yesterday and mentioned it. There hasn't been an actual post on this on their main site that I don't believe yet. When that happens, I will be sure to send that out. But basically what they said was, Commanders will now trigger Dies effects when they go to the graveyard. It will trigger Exile effects when they go to exile. So, again, I don't know the exact kind of wording of kind of how they're making this happen, the official rules. When that happens, I will be sure to send that out. But basically, it's going to be much more intuitive now. You know, if your commander has a death trigger on it, and it dies, even if you can send it to the command zone still, you still get that death trigger. So, it's going to be much more intuitive for people, especially for players like me, who, I always forget about those kind of things, like, oh, yeah, you've got whatever in play, that's supposed to happen, when something dies, oh, your commander technically didn't die because it didn't go to the graveyard or whatnot, it's a replacement effect. It just makes things a lot cleaner, in my opinion. It makes certain commanders work a lot better because you're not kind of straining them into the graveyard. Let's go through one really quick, or a couple really quick. So I think the biggest impact ones to start off with, let's start with Elenda the Dusk Rose, a 1/1 vampire knight with lifelink that costs 2 white/black. It says, whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Elenda the Dusk Rose. When Elenda dies, create X/1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink where X is Elenda's power. So yeah, that second part is definitely problematic, or was problematic, because basically, you had to decide, okay, when Elenda dies, I have to decide to strand her in my graveyard. I mean, obviously, in white/black, you've got ways to reanimate, you've got ways to get back, but still, you're making that decision that instead of, you don't have the option to send her back to the command zone if you want that death trigger. Now it actually works, so Elenda can die, you get your giant, vampire army, with lifelink and whatnot, and you can still send Elenda back to the command zone so you can recast her from there. If you don't have, any other reanimation effects or whatnot available, you can always choose to do that now. So again, I believe Elenda actually got bought out the second that this announcement happened, so she's going for much more now. But basically, yeah. So a lot of commanders actually got a lot more feasible kind of with this. Another one that got more feasible again is Rolask Apex Hybrid, a 4/5 human mutant with flying and trample, costing 2 green, blue. When it enters the battlefield, put 2+1/+1 counters on another target creature you control, and when it dies, proliferate, then proliferate again. This one, Blue's got some ways to kind of get around kind of the, or at least help out with this. It previously did, it still does. But basically, you can make a clone. There's plenty of clone effects in Blue. You make a clone of Rolask, that clone dies, you get the clone's death trigger from that. So basically, you were kind of working ways to get around that. But now you still essentially can, instead of stranding Rolask in your graveyard, if you want to get that proliferate again from when your actual Rolask dies, you can, and then send it back to the command zone and recast from there still. Child of Volara is one that benefits as well. It's a 6/6 avatar with trample that costs Wooburg, and when it's put into a graveyard from play, destroy all non-land permanents that can't be regenerated. So yeah, this is essentially a huge board wipe every single time it dies. So yeah, now you can basically let it die, have it go back to your command zone, and recast. I actually built a deck around kind of recurring and getting this one back. So yeah, you still will probably want that package and that kind of deck to still recur it, because yeah, it goes from 5 mana to 7 mana to 9 mana. So it can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. But yeah, if you need to send it to the command zone, you can still do that and still get that death trigger. One that some people pointed out, which I thought was interesting, it is benefited now, is Malthus Fiendseeker, a 3/3 vampire with menace that costs red, white, black. It has at the beginning of your end step, put a bounty counter on target creature and opponent controls for as long as that creature has with a bounty counter on it. It has, when this creature dies, each opponent draws a card and gains 2 life. So the thing that actually, Malthus doesn't have a death trigger on it itself, but basically the thing that Malthus benefits from now with this rules change is that When you previously were putting bounty counters on your opponent's creatures, if with a Malthus deck, you pretty much avoided putting them on commanders because when the commander dies, the player can just essentially say, okay, yeah, I'm putting the command zone, so you don't get that death trigger. So basically, it was kind of useless to put a bounty counter on a commander because no one benefits from it dying with a bounty counter on it. There's no incentive for the other players to try to take that creature out because, again, the bounty counter is essentially useless. Now it actually works, and this probably is going to really change the way that Malthus players play because, typically commanders are going to be the biggest target on the board, for a deck. Many decks revolve around commanders. So yeah, Malthus players can now say, okay, yeah, I'll put bounty counters on your commanders first instead of, just avoiding putting them on there at all. The other kind of entire cycle that benefits from this is the Dragon cycle from Kamigawa. Kakusho, the Evening Star, is a 5/5 Dragon Spirit with flying that costs 4 black. When it dies, each opponent loses 5 life. You gain life equal to life lost this way. This one, actually, someone pointed out, is very ironic that it is kind of getting a buff now, right? Because, again, you'd have to do a lot of reanimation effects, which you probably still are going to do in that deck. But yeah, now you do have the option of, if you want to, send it to your commands and you still get that death trigger. At one point, Kakusho was banned as a commander way back in the day. But yeah, it was banned at one point because it was so powerful in the format. It's not seen as that anymore. It's completely fine in the format, and now it's essentially getting a buff. I mean, obviously all these commanders are getting a buff, but it's just pretty ironic and funny to see kind of how the commander format has evolved and changed. One that I built a deck around, that again kind of works like Roll-esque. With you're going to be using clone effects. Kaiga the Tidestar is a 5/5 Dragon Spirit with flying, costs 5 and a blue. When it dies, gain control of target creature. So again, you make clones. You get a ton of Kaiga clones that get death triggers. You get to gain control of creatures. But now there is kind of the disincentive for your opponents to try to take out Kaiga. So again, it does buff Kaiga as well, because when Kaiga dies, you do get that death trigger from Kaiga to the actual Kaiga, not just the clones. So yeah, if an opponent is going to try to kill Kaiga, you can say, okay, I mean, if you're going to do that, I'm going to gain control of your best creature. So it does definitely buff. It gives kind of a disincentive to do that. One that people are pointing out too that definitely gets a buff for this is Yosai the Morningstar. 5/5 Dragon Spirit with flying, costs 4 white. When it dies, target player skips their next untap step, tap up to 5 permanents that player controls. So yeah, this is a pretty powerful effect on a death trigger, and again, there are ways to get creatures back in white from your graveyard, but yeah, being able to kind of just say, okay, yeah, now I also can just send to my command zone and, recast if I need to. Rusai the Flying Star is another one, 5/5 Dragon Spirit with flying, costs 5 and a red. When it dies, it deals 5 damage to each creature without flying. Red doesn't have a ton of ways, not to my knowledge, to get creatures back from the graveyard. So this is a good way, again, to say, okay, yeah, we can just keep sending it to the command zone, keep doing that. Again, there's not too many ways to abuse it in red, to my knowledge. I mean, there are some kind of like quick clone effects, where you get like, a token until end of turn copy. And that would be the way that you do it. But again, now you do have that option to send it to your command zone instead of trying to strain it in your graveyard when you want to get that effect still. The one that probably really doesn't matter still, because it's pretty weak, no offense to Juga the Rising Star, a 5/5 Dragon Spirit with flying that costs 3 green. When Juga the Rising Star dies, you may distribute 5+1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures. Yeah, it's still bad. No offense to all you fans of Juga. An incidental impact that kind of happens for a couple of these. It isn't, as game changing as some of the other ones I brought up so far, but it is something to take note of. OmniFocus of Rage is a 5/5 elemental that costs 3 red, green with landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. Whenever OmniFocus of Rage dies or another elemental you control dies, Omnath deals 3 damage to target creature or player. So now, I mean, you were still getting those death triggers, obviously, from your other elementals, but now you get that kind of lightning bolt whenever Omnath dies too. Because again, previously you were definitely not going to be stranding Omnath in your graveyard, because Omnath is a key piece to that deck. Obviously, there are some ways in green to get it back, but typically you were not making that trade-off, the 3 damage for getting Omnath in your graveyard. Now, if Omnath is killed, you do still get to bolt something with Omnath as well, so just keep that in mind. Same thing with Pashlik Mons. Pashlik Mons is a 2/2 Goblin Warrior that costs 2 and a red. Whenever it or another Goblin you control dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. So yeah, essentially, again, if Pashlik Mons dies, you get that ping effect as well. Annex Harden the Forge, keep this in mind as well with this. A star 3 Demigod that costs 1 red. Its power is equal to your devotion to red. Whenever it or another creature or non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 red Satyr creature token with this creature can't block. And if the creature had power 4 or greater, create 2 of those tokens instead. So basically, typically you're either going to get 1 or 2 tokens with Annex dying now as well. Previously, you were probably not sending Annex to your graveyard for that effect. But yeah, now Annex essentially counts itself for getting that token or tokens as well. One that's pretty funny that actually works now, and you know what, it could be fun to see some decks built around this one now because it actually kind of be a little more feasible, is Tuk Tuk the Explorer. A 1/1 goblin with haste that costs 2 and a red. When it dies, create a 5/5 legendary colorless goblin golem artifact creature token named Tuk Tuk the Returned. So yeah, now you can essentially, you know, get your Tuk Tuk deck working in the way that you think it should. Essentially, you know, when Tuk Tuk dies, you can still send it to the command zone, so you can recast it. Again, red doesn't have too many ways to get creatures back from the graveyard. So basically, yeah, you can just get your 5/5 Tuk Tuk army going on. So yeah. Kind of a bigger impact that kind of applies to probably more games. You know, even if a game doesn't necessarily have any of these commanders that are built around kind of a death trigger, there are still plenty of times where these things occur in games that can kind of, again, that were previously kind of into something, an annoying kind of rule that you had to remember that, you know, like, okay, if a commander dies, it doesn't trigger any of these death triggers. Like a Blood Artist. Blood Artist is a 0/1 vampire that costs 1 and a black. Whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. If someone casts a board wipe, again, before this rule change happened, let's say there were, 4 commanders on the board. Someone casts a board wipe, you don't get to count any of those commanders if they're all being sent back to the command zone as, you know, having died for your Blood Artist. So now it does. So make sure you keep that in mind. Again, that was kind of like an annoying, like, okay, how many creatures died total? Okay, yeah, there was 15 creatures total, so I'm going to drain you for 15. Oh, wait. 4 of those were commanders. They went back to the command zone, so it's only 11 then, or whatnot. Now that doesn't change. You're not counting things separately. Like, okay, this was a commander, this one wasn't. This went to the command zone, this didn't. It just makes it a lot more simpler. Basically, Grave Pact is another one. Kind of those kind of effects. It's in a shape that costs 1 black. Whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. So previously, this one, and this kind of effect didn't affect, commanders. If someone's commander died, or if your commander died, you weren't able to make other players sacrifice a creature from that. Now you can. Yeah, Grave Pact definitely need to get better. Not really, but anyways, I think it just makes things a lot cleaner. Mark Rosewater had talked about basically how they were limited. They had been limited in designing legendary creatures with death triggers because, again, with that kind of like a Lenda example, it just like it's a cool card for standard. And, it could be a cool commander, but it didn't work really as a commander as, many people thought it should or wanted it to because of that, replacement effect that was happening where you're not getting a death trigger. So they were kind of avoiding even, they might make a cool creature with a death trigger on it, but they weren't making it legendary because of, that rule, because it's kind of a wonky kind of, rule that, it just doesn't work in the way that you want to or the way that it should. So now they're kind of not being limited. So it'll be interesting to see, obviously, they, plan things out years in advance, and this rule change is probably new to them as well. So, we might not see any commanders in the near future kind of with these changes in mind, with, more commander death triggers in mind. But, a couple years out, we might see some more commanders that do some really cool things with death triggers. So I'm excited to see that. But yeah, my thoughts are essentially this is a fantastic change. I'm glad that they made this change. It makes things a lot more intuitive. It makes things, again, it helps certain commanders out that, needed the help. And basically, it just made things kind of work the way, again, that everyone thinks that they should work. Not everyone, but many people thought it should work. It's a lot better for new players and for players like me who aren't always great with the rules. So essentially, I would love to hear from you, though. Comment below and let me know your thoughts on this rules change. Do you think it's a good rules change? Do you think it's not? So yeah, just comment below and let me know what you think. And as always, thanks again and have a good one. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.